to the Midwifery Folklorist, Oral Archive, and Lunar Gathering Space. I'm your host and priestess, Midwife Okunchola Amadou. This is a living archive of birth mysteries and midwifery wisdom, and together we're gathering every new and full moon around the globe. Welcome. I greet you today on this beautiful full moon that we have. It is so wonderful to be back in this space with you for the Lunar Archive, for the Oral Archive, and the Lunar Gathering Space. My name is Okunchola Amadou, and I'm your host, midwife, priestess, folklorist, museum professional, and midwifery historian. It is just a really beautiful moon-filled day, and it's just really an honor to come to you again. I'm in my shrine room and have just placed some copal and frankincense and myrrh onto a piece of coal. And so just imagine I'm sitting in front of my beautiful shrines. Specifically, my Yemoya shrine is calling to me today. As I started my day and the moon kept dancing and calling with me so that I could be in that moment, I was reminded that around this very time in 2022, so 3 years ago, I was initiated into Yemoya. And the Orisha, the primordial spirits of Yemoya. And Yemoya is the goddess, the deity, the Orisha, the primordial spirit of the waters that actually called me away from organized religion and Christianity and called me away from all the things that hampered my soul. And she step by step brought me into African traditional religion. So before I met Mami Wata, I met Yemoya. And so I started working with Yemoya years ago. So back in like 2009, and eventually received my Elekes in 2000. I believe it was either December of 13 or January of 14. One of those. It was during a snowstorm, but I received my Elekes, I think early 2014. And at that time, that's when I was told to focus on working with my ancestors and the herbal path that I was on, and also the midwifery path. But hoodoo kept coming up. They were telling me, keep working with your southern roots and you will find the path and the lineage that you should initiate to. So between 2009 and receiving my full set of Elekes, and for those who don't know, Elekes are consecrated beaded necklaces that represent, sometimes if you get a full set, it will represent what we would call the 7 African powers or the 7 core orishas in the Yoruba tradition of Asheshe, Santeria, Lukumi, depending on which lineage and path you go through. But these Elekes are consecrated with ewe, which is what we call herbs in the tradition. They're consecrated sometimes with ebo, which is the spirit and life force of animals that were offered in sacrifice to open the way. And also with other oriki, songs and prayers placed onto them just for you, to align you with the protection of those primordial energies. So receiving the Elekes was not an initiation for me. It was a way to start me on that path And prior to receiving my late gaze, I already had an altar to Yemoya. And there's a difference between an altar and a shrine. So I'm going there with you because that's where Spirit is calling me as we prepare to talk about today's topic. So before receiving my late gaze, and even after, I had an altar for Yemoya. So an altar could be like a sacred table, a windowsill. It could be on a shelf, a fireplace mantle, anywhere there's a solid surface. And you can place items or objects that are in alignment or in spirit of this specific Orisha, deity, or ancestral spirit. So for me, my altar had images of what I would believe a water deity, an Orisha like Yemoya. And put some more resins on my coal. So I communicated with her. I worked with her with my rituals. I did bi-weekly rituals, new moon, full moon. And Yemoya is who got me to Ghana, West Africa in 2013. I briefly talk about that in Oral Archive 1. And so, I go from 2014 and I go deeper into my midwifery bag, my doula bag, my herbalist bag. I start working at a herb shop. I do all the things that I was called to do through the path that I was on with her. And it wasn't until 2022 that I was officially initiated into Yemoya. The year prior, in 2021, I was initiated into Olokun. And very briefly, I'll tell you the difference between these two primordial water deities. Olokun is the primordial water energy of the planet and the universe. So think about the cosmic waters. But if we think specifically about this planet, Olokun represents the deep, dark, watery aspects of the underworld, of the underwater, the parts that most humans have not even touched or ventured into. That's where the wisdom, the mysteries, the treasures of the origins of the earth really rest and live. And so when we think about that, is the haven that Olokun represents. And there's so much to that power as an Olokun priestess that I can go into and talk about. But when we speak about her, we think about wealth, vastness of wealth. We think about dark, deep, feminine mysteries, the mysteries of our womb, of the waters in our womb, the mysteries of what is in our bones and in our spirits that gives us the power to create. Olokun, when she manifested on this planet, was a beautiful person, like a queen in her village. And she was known as a wealthy woman in Nigeria. And she beaded the most finest, beautiful jewelry. And so she was known for someone who created beautiful jewelry through these coral, beautiful colored beads. And it's just so interesting that when I was called on this path through Yemoya, and I was pulled away from working at the time, the first thing that I started to do on my journey in leaving mainstream religion and leaving mainstream employment was I taught myself how to bead. And I still have this image in my mind of falling asleep on top of all of these beads while I'm teaching myself how to make jewelry to bring joy into my life and money into my family and joy to other people. So back to the difference between Olokun and Yemoya. So we know Olokun governs the deep, dark, watery parts of the ocean. She is the biggest fishes, deep fishes in the seas, your whales and all of those big, gigantic fishes that are in the ocean. So she governs all the water on the planet, all of the cosmic waters within the universe. And then we know Yemoya. Yemoya specifically is tied to the surface level of the oceans and the seas. So think about the shallow parts of the water, the waves that we see when we kind of go scuba diving in a little bit, those parts of the water, not the dark, dense parts. And Yemoya She is the mother of the fishes in the sea, in a sense, to where we think about those fishes that you can see when you scuba dive, not the big, deep, gigantic ones that are in the movies that you're like, oh my gosh, But Yemoya, she represents the mother. She is there to protect the womb, the life growing in the womb. She nourishes and protects mothers through pregnancy and through childbirth. And she is really there as a nurturer, right? And so she brings that feminine wisdom as we are as mothers, as we nurture our children, as we nurture ourselves, as our breasts grow in pregnancy and postpartum to feed and nourish our babies. Now, Yemoya's medicine is far deeper than that, but just for the sake of time, since that's not our direct topic, I initiated to her in 2022. And this time of the year makes 3 years for me. And so I talked about me sitting across from her shrine right now. And before we started, I gave her some what we call OT, which is alcohol, gin, or rum. And a shrine is a vessel that has been consecrated and blessed, much like your alekes, but through an actual ceremony where we are invoking the fullness and the spirit and the energy of this primordial Orisha, Yemoya, so that her primordial energy will live fully encased within this vessel. Okay? So, taking a drink of water. Imagine Yemoya being the doorway, the gateway for me to leave the rat race, leave the matrix, leave the grid, all the things that we call. And there wasn't a rush to initiate. There wasn't a rush to want to be a priestess or want to be anything. I really, really marinated myself into what does it mean to walk with Yemoya? What does it mean to be in oneness with the spirit of the oceans, the surface of the oceans? As a mother, I was a mother at the time when I started working with her of 2 children. So I wanted to know. And it was Yemoya that walked with me in changing my diet. I started eating more plant-based for 6 years before, was full plant-based before eating meat. I began making my own soaps and making my own household cleaning products with botanicals. I, stopped being afraid to be a teacher and mastered yoga and started teaching yoga. So if you listen to episode 1, you hear more about that specific journey. So the thing that I want to bring to your attention is that as we talk about these spiritual, traditional, indigenous stories of our midwives and of our ancestors, as we talk about this, please, we're coming from a colonialist, patriarchal lens. We can be as pro-Black as we want to and spiritual as we need to, but because of the society that we live in, sometimes we tend to approach traditional and indigenous midwifery in a piecemeal. So when I talked last oral archive about the drum, I can't tell you how many midwives maybe went out and bought drums and said, I'm going to take a drum to every birth I go to. It could, sometimes we may have this deep yearning and pulling to want to get back to what belongs to us, what is ours, that we quickly grab and hold on to things without first allowing things that can get in the way, that can misconstrue it. We have to sit and let those things melt away from us. We have to let those things leave our bodies and our spirits and our space and our minds. So it's okay to hear in the oral archive, midwives used to bring drums to births and use them. They weren't aesthetics. They weren't something to take a picture of and to tell somebody, hey, I'm a medicine woman. Midwives utilized herbs. Indigenous midwives utilized herbs throughout the perinatal period. And it wasn't something to show on Instagram with pretty videos and aesthetics and flowers and honey and show your hands in water and herb. None of it was about show. None of it was about ego. None of it was about, look at me, I know what I'm doing. Don't I look great? Take a picture. So, I'm telling you that. This is not to say, oh, do like me, be like me. This is medicine. As I watch people just grab and run for aesthetic show and not full embodiment. And we need full embodiment systemically through our indigenous sacred ways as women and as indigenous and traditional midwives reclaiming who we are. We need that in order to fully reclaim birthing practices. And as long as we exist in the capitalist, colonialist pride and ego, look at me spaces, then we won't get that far, right? We'll keep returning to the ways that tear us apart. So, luckily, when I was called through Yemoya all those years ago, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Instagram. I wasn't taking pictures of all of these things. I was living and embodying and breathing and doing. So by the time I initiate into Yemoya, I'm in a critical point in my life where my midwifery career is changing vastly. And I wasn't quite sure. And I'm like, wait, I was called to be a midwife. I was called to do this work. I was called to tear the system down. And you know what? I just got chills. My Yemoya initiation 3 years ago sat me down, lifted me up, threw me to the other side of the ocean, and dunked me underwater to see again. That yes, I had a role to play to lift up my voice, to reclaim my power through my third home birth after 2 C-sections, to invoke and inspire other women to do so, to build systems, to show people that there's another way. Yes, I needed to do that. But also, I know that I have so many gifts, just as you do, and that fighting inside of the system to make change, you have to know and agree to your soul, your spirit, your mind, and your body being eroded. You're going to be impacted negatively. You're going to sacrifice your body and your mind and your spirit, which will impact you and your family while you're saving the masses. Right? So we have to, Yemoya's medicine is teaching me how to nurture myself through nurturing others. And I'm going to tell you the truth. This part of my midwifery career, as I prepare to share this oral archive message with you, is about nurturing myself to nurture others and getting out of the system. The take-home message with this that sat with me this morning as I woke up. Think of a firefighter, right? A firefighter is called to be highly skilled and prepared to fight fires on behalf of his community, the people that he loves, people that he doesn't know. They're trained. They have special equipment, special clothing, all of those things to avoid as much as possible getting burned or harmed in that fire and from losing their lives. However, even with that equipment, there's secondhand burns, second and third degree burns. There's smoke inhalation. There's tons of things that this firefighter is going to have wear and tear on their bodies, even if they survive it. And that's what it means to me. I'm not putting this on anyone else. That is what it means to me, being a midwife in the system. I can call myself a traditional midwife. I can learn all the ways. but being in the system, still applying to the standard OB schedule, applying to the standard this and the standards, all the standards, the tests, the poking, the prodding, all of the medical things. When you start midwifery school, you are taught how to check blood pressure. You are taught how to do your basic vitals like you're a nurse. You are taught the basic obstetrical schedule. You are taught how to use the Doppler to listen. You are taught, the different labs and things that are going. You are taught all of these medical things. And what part are we taught culture? Where does that come in at? So Yemoya's medicine on my 3rd anniversary of being with her is this. I will no longer take 1st, 2nd, or 3rd degree burns on my body to nurture and save another person. I will nurture myself by restoring and reclaiming and embodying and living through my indigenous and traditional ways as an African woman living in America currently. And through the nurturing and honoring and restoring of those things within me and my family, I can do and gift and share that with others without harming myself. And that is how we restore. So that is what I'm sharing with you, that it is important to sit, to be, to listen. Don't rush. Don't run into it. It will take time. But as it takes time and as it comes together, just know that you are receiving the things that you need to receive. So, okay, I'm happy that Yemoya is with us. I'm happy that she has opened the way. I just went right in, y'all. Let me officially open the way. That message needed to come through. Thank you. Dear gracious divine creator, the one who holds the keys to the doorways to the primordial ones that sit around us, that breathes with us, walks with us, talks with us, and comes to us in our dreams, that elevates their wisdom and their interactions with us on this beautiful full moon day. We give thanks for your elevation, honor, and restoration and healing of our ancestors and of the lineage that we come through. May today's message and wisdom and blessings be bountiful, abundant, and may they hit within the spirit and the minds and hearts and cells of those who need it the most. May this space be sacredly and divinely protected and guided by the highest form of presence and protection. We give divine and sacred, authentic and genuine thanks. Ashe. All right, so today is April 12th, 2025, y'all. And it's a full moon. Some people call it the pink full moon. Whatever the different terms are, typically those terms come from Farmer's Almanac. But this oral archive and lunar gathering, which is the 3rd in our series, our lunar theme today is returning to the womb of the earth. Last series, we talked about the drum and the primordial energy and spirits of the Ayami and the other celestial beings that protect and guide birth. That was a deep session. And so today we are honoring the midwives of different parts of Africa. And we're honoring them as they birthed as communion with the land spirit and the ancestors. So today's episode or oral archive, I will call it, is titled "The Earth is My Co-Midwife." And this is African Indigenous birth wisdom and the April full moon's call to re-emergence, okay? So thinking about this full moon, let's check in there, right? So this full moon is traditionally named for like early blooming wild ground floats. So this is a type of a flower. I actually saw some today in the field today while riding with my husband. And so that pink full moon is named because those flowers come up right around this time. This is our first full moon since the spring equinox here in the northern hemisphere. So this full moon definitely signals a time of renewal, fertility, and emergence. So I want us to think about a couple of things celestially that are happening. The sun is still in Aries, and Aries is a sign that's the first in our astrological wheel that talks about beginnings, fresh energy, new life, springing forward, giving birth to newness. The sun is being reborn, that star is being reborn. And then we're thinking about this big, bright full moon that's signaling this blossom and this bursting open of seeds that have been previously planted and started to germinate and come to life. Now, this full moon is in the sign of Venus, okay? So if we think about that, right, let's line all this juiciness up. Venus is a planet that deals with femininity, love, the divine feminine, sensuality, fairness, and bountiness, right? So the moon is in the sign of Libra, and Libra is governed by Venus. So we have a full moon in Libra governed by Venus, and then we have a sun in Aries. So if we think about this Aries forceful, let's go get it, new energy. And then we match that up with the energy of Venus that's about love and divine femininity and this abundance and this fullness, that Empress kind of energy if you're into tarot. And then match that with Libra, which is about the scales of balancing. So that tells me there's a re-emerging and a birthing of something that you have planted previously that you've been kind of going back and forth on, and maybe you've been spending too much time planning, being afraid, waiting for the right moment. And this full moon is going to push you over the ledge and say, go. Now is the time. And you know what else this full moon is going to do? It is going to pull the jacket off of your arm so that you can be free and walk. And this happened to me today. Not planned. I've been working on things back and forth. Should I? And almost like a boulder falling down on you. Everything that was confusing for me about it moved out of the way, and I moved forged ahead with those plans. So this moon, I'm asking you to think about if it's just one thing. It could be, you could have many, but what is that one thing that you deep down inside desire to do and to really give birth to, and you've just been afraid? You want to tap into and sit under this moon. And we have 3 days after the full moon. We've talked about this in our previous archives. So you have today and the 3 days after to tap into this energy and to be brought into your fullness of really manifesting this. So think about this. Go and dance around in your backyard. If you don't have a backyard, dance around in your house to music that raises your energy. And while you're dancing, envision this thing that you're manifesting and growing. If you have a lover, be intimate with your lover. If you trust them with this vision, talk to them about this vision so that when you're intimate and making love and being orgasmic, you can give birth in a life to this vision and this dream. If you're not partnered and you're into self-pleasure, you can do that with yourself. You can opt to take a nice soaking, healing bath, and you can invoke that energy playing that music in the bathtub. You can take a shower, and while your eyes are closed and the water runs over your head, you can start to envision and pray and dance in those thoughts. There's a multitude of ways that you can manifest this energy. Don't forget, you can put some water outside under the full moon, and you can speak over that pure water the things that you want to manifest, and you're going to drink that water the next few days, okay? So put a big jug out there. Those are the things I want you to know, and those are the things that are important for you for this full moon. So just a few pointers before we move into the wisdom of a reemergence here. We know that this moon, again, is a signal in a time of renewal and fertility and emergence. So it's about reawakening your creative and reproductive energies. Giving birth is not always about a physical baby, okay? But it's about keeping your reproductive energies alive, thriving, and well, so that anything you want to manifest, you can. So that's why the first thing that I said was go out and dance, move your body, move around, because that's how we keep that vital energy and blood flow and oxygen around our womb space. And if you are a person who has had a hysterectomy or a partial hysterectomy, or if you are a person listening to this oral archive and you aren't female body, that's okay. You can still tap into your creative birthing power. Now, this full moon is also about shedding your winter shell of stagnancy. So because, in the winter we hibernate. And so sometimes we put on a little bit of weight. Sometimes we slow down. So also you want to think about emerging from hiding. And you're coming from that hibernation with deeper clarity and direction to move forward. And then you're also initiating a bold reclamation of your ancestral path. So my story earlier about Yemoya was talking about how a primordial Orisha helped to get me deeper in relationship with my ancestors and my ancestral path before I initiated, right? So what is your ancestral path that you need to be on? So thinking about that energy of the womb, when the womb is ready to give birth, it has a pushing energy, that ejection reflex. This moon is the rejection reflex. This pink full moon, this spring full moon is the ejection reflex. And this speaks to pushing energy, where what has been growing quietly beneath the surface, your studies, your visions, your medicine, this now begins to crown. Y'all know that ring of fire where you like, oh, no, I'm not ready. But then boom, your baby flies out. That's what this moon is about. So tap in. This is an ideal moment for you to call forth the wisdom that is in your lineage, especially if you are a person of African descent or of the diaspora. I'm speaking from that perspective. I honor all of my indigenous people, but I'm not Native American indigenous. I am not an indigenous person from Australia or from Hawaii or other parts of the world. I can speak to my African diasporan people. So I'm telling you to call forth your wisdom through your African lineage. And if you are a part of another culture, and you have been impacted by colonialism and patriarchy and capitalism, call forth your ancestral wisdom during this moon, because it is going to push you so much more like a trampoline in the direction you need to be in. So, where the earth itself has long been seen as a womb, and the midwife is the one who walks between the spirit and physical realms, this is where this moon sits. So let's get into the stories of today, right? So we talked about how this moon, we want to invoke this oral archive around the earth being our co-midwife. Last week it was the drum. This week it is the earth being our co-midwife. So there's a few different things. I'm going to give some examples from South Africa, because I have a surprise. The next oral archive, I'm telling you all, a little something. A lot of you know that I visited South Africa and traveled there in autumn of 2023. So I have some updates about that. But let's start. So thinking about birth as a spiritual arrival, in South African cosmology. Now, I don't speak South African languages, and I do not want to disrespect the language. So I will spell out the word and attempt to say it, and know that I won't be saying it correctly. I don't have the dialect. So please have grace if you're listening and you are from South Africa. But regarding the Xhosa cosmology, and that's Xhosa, in pre-colonial Xhosa culture, birth was not seen as just being biological, how it is here, how I mentioned earlier. Birth was seen as an arrival of a spirit sent by the ancestors. So thinking about last oral archive, we talked about the communication between the spirit and the creator, and deciding to come and choosing the mothers and the parents, and the ancestors playing a role in getting the mother and the parents, the fathers, getting their bodies and their lives ready. Like, oh, the ancestors can see this spirit is ready to come down here, and you want this spirit. This spirit wants to be a part of this village and this family. So the ancestors is calling and communicating and working with this spirit before it even comes down into the family. And this could be a returning ancestor, a spirit that's already been in the family, a great grandmama or auntie, or it can be a new spirit emerging from the cosmic realm to join the family for the first time. Either way, the ancestors play a role in welcoming and preparing both sides, the physical parents and family and village and community, and the spirit. So this is why maybe Yemo called me to start off by saying, please don't neglect your ancestors, because they are doing work that you have no idea. Some people become pregnant and they're like, oh, I'm pregnant. Oh my God, I got to make this change and do this. When we have to understand that, honey, there was lots of things happening before you became pregnant. And if you are out of alignment with that, you miss the power and bounty there. So with that being said, we understand that this culture, like many, knew that the spirit that was arriving was sent, guarded, protected, guided by the ancestors. And the midwife, who was known as the Umbelezi, Umbelethisi, would be spiritually prepared, oftentimes fasting or abstaining before attending births. So the midwife knew how important it was for her body and her vessel to be pure and ready. So what was she eating? What was she listening to? What was she ingesting? Was she spiritually cleansed before going to this birth? And a lot of people who fast understand that when you fast, you can hear the creator, God, the ancestor, the earth spirits, the primordial spirits. You can hear this all so clearly. If you think about all of the different types of humans and groups and levels and hierarchies we have on the physical level, that's all in the spiritual level too. So a trained and skilled midwife knows how to communicate effectively on those different levels of spiritual families and groups and hierarchies. And being cleansed and pure allows her to do that. Now, thinking about your midwives and your OBs and maternal fetal medicine doctors today that are delivering babies, and your nurses and all of that, who is being cognitive of their spiritual frame, of their mental, emotional frame, of their physical frame, of what they're eating and listening to and talking about before a birth? I've been at plenty of births where the nurses are joking and talking over the patient and doctors are talking about sports and chuckling, just ultimately disrespectful, right? Not in cultural birth, not in spiritual birth, not in Xhosa cosmology. So in this pre-colonial framework, before labor began, elders would anoint the birthing huts with specific herbal preparations that were meant and to keep, away bad energies and spirits, and to call in the most purest energies and guardians of this birthing process. They would burn a herb that was almost akin to like a wild sage on our side, but that herb spelled Impepho. And they would call on the ancestors, the Amadlozi, and that's Amadlozi. These are their ancestors that would guard that threshold between the worlds, the physical world and the spiritual world. So, I'm reading this specifically from Traditional Beliefs in Xhosa Pregnancy and Birth. And this is a journal on indigenous knowledge systems in South Africa. So I'm going to be reading a bit of things that I have compiled for this oral archive, and then the physical archive will be available on the Midwifery Folklorist website soon so that you can follow along. So I want you to think about this. This specific story that I just shared briefly about the ancestors guiding and protecting and guarding both the parents and the community and the village, preparing to welcome the child, and the spirit, and making sure that they come through, and then thinking about how the midwife spiritually prepared herself and how they also spiritually protected and prepared the birthing hut. I want you to think about how this reminds us of the importance of the midwife as a threshold guardian, not as a medical provider. And this reminds us, I hope you had a chance to read the nervous system document on the website that talks about the importance of a midwife's nervous system being balanced. But this reminds us of the importance of a midwife as a threshold guardian whose nervous system, energy field, and intentions open or close the gate. Okay? Now we're going to move into the second part of this story and thinking about the earth as a birth partner. Now, when I was in South Africa, I did have a chance to visit the Venda village and community. And so these stories come from Venda and Songa, South Africa. And Songa is spelled Tsonga, and Venda is spelled Venda. Now, in Venda cosmology, the earth, which they call Mavungu, Mavhungu, is a mother. The earth is a mother, and babies are said to come from deep within her caves. Women often labored outdoors or in circular huts, and when I was in Venda, I had a chance to see the circular huts where it was attached to the midwife's home, and where women would come. It was almost a labor ward attached to her home, and this is where they would birth. Now, they were birthing directly on the earth, not on an electronic bed that has stirrups that come out and it moves up and down and goes back and forth. They birthed on the earth, where midwives use rhythmic foot tapping, humming, and specific grounding herbs to stabilize the energy in the room. Now, midwives oftentimes place stone talismans, so stones that have been consecrated and blessed. Kind of think about that process that I mentioned around the elekes and the shrine. They often place sacred roots from the baobab tree, and that's a whole nother oral archive all about the baobab tree. But one thing that I can say about that, the baobab tree represented this ancient strength of the earth. So that was placed under the birthing mat, and the mat was made from nature fibers, right? So the baby, when born, was immediately introduced to the earth with a symbolic first touch ceremony where their feet were rubbed with soil and sacred herbs that had been prepared. Now, thinking about this sacred weaving of a story as the earth as a partner, as a birth partner in Venda and Songa, thinking about that, what does it mean to see the earth as your co-midwife? The earth as your co-midwife. What happens when birth is grounded literally and spiritually? Now, that story came from Land and Childbirth Rituals and Venda Midwifery, and it's actually in South African Oral History Archive. Now, I have a few more of these stories before I recount an overall expression of how in different parts of Africa, the earth has been looked to as a mother and as a guide in childbirth. Now, a little bit more on the spirit of drums and songs. And this time, this is from a Zulu birthing cultural rites. And so thinking about Zulu midwives in South Africa, they were known as Ibelites. And I know I'm not saying that correctly, but it's Abelletshis. Now, Zulu midwives sang birth songs handed down through their lineage. So think about these were birth songs that these midwives maybe heard sung while they were sleeping in the bed or while they were watching a baby come in. So these songs have continuously to ring through the spirits, hearts, minds, and bosoms and ears of these midwives through the years and generations. So many of the birth songs began with clicks and guttural tones because that is the dialect of the Zulu people. Now, these clicks and guttural tones, they mirrored ancestral speech. So it was an invocation. And in high stress births, the midwife would lead the birthing circle in clapping and percussive rhythms. So whether that's hitting a drum or slapping the thighs, or using the hands or rattles or drum like calabashes, these rhythms were known to call down specific calming spirits. So understand that spirits of the earth have a role and a job to play. Some are to raise energy, some are to stabilize it, some are to ground energy, some are mischievous, some are abundantly positive. So what energy are you calling on? So depending on how you are aligned, if you arrive to the birth with a stable, well-nourished nervous system, if you arrive to the birth nourished and clear and with positive intentions, then when things may get overwhelming or stressful, a midwife can anchor herself and use music and song and movements and to direct and orchestrate the room to call down specific calming spirits that they have a relationship with. It can be an ancestor, it can be a community ancestor or a personal ancestor, and it can be a primordial earth spirit. You can call them by their names because you feed them and take care of them and say, I need you here. Reconnect the womb with this ancestral harmony so that the voice that I'm using and the beat that I'm using can realign the baby's journey with the mother to have an easy birth. And this is almost like using a spiritual compass. So back to the beginning of this oral archive when we talked about be in relationship with your ancestors. You don't want to wait till you're in a challenging position as a birth worker to need to call on a spirit for help because they always come. But when you take care of them, they come fastly. They come fast. The work is done right. It's a wonderful situation versus you asking somebody for something that you ain't taking care of. You know how that energy is in the real world. So again, if you are practicing as an indigenous and traditional midwife, then there you have to have a pantheon of spirits on all those different levels, ancestral, primordial. You have to think about having those different levels of connections with the spirit world. So when these things happen, they can come in and work for you. So here with this example of the Zulu midwives and how they use birth songs handed down through lineages, through their traditional indigenous dialect and guttural tones and clicks that mirrored the ancestral speech to invoke them, and how they use clapping and percussive rhythms and hand rattles and calabash drums, everything from the earth. Thinking about this and thinking about our last oral archive where we talked about drumming as a midwife, this story is reminding us that rhythm is not sound alone. It is literally language that guides the soul, and it has the ability to guide a baby home through its mother's womb, when it may be turning the wrong way, when a mother could be getting tense or afraid, and then it redirects the birth, the midwife can turn on a spiritual compass and say, go that way, without touching the mother. So I want to ask you some questions as we get closer to rounding off these stories from Africa and closing out our archive. I have a few things I want to ask of you. What birth songs are buried in your bones? Someone may not have sang when you were born, and that's okay. But somebody sang a song for your grandmother. On either side, mother or father, someone sang a song for her mother. And someone's been singing since the origins of your lineage. What are those songs? I'm getting chills and vibrations all over my body. What birth songs are buried in your bones? Let them come up. Let them arise. You may be in a shower and you may cry as this song tries to come up through your belly and your heart and your throat, just moving up. You may cry at the birthing of these songs that haven't been heard through your lineage and heard on this earth in a long time. We need our birthing songs back. They are more than the tones, right? They are medicine. They are protection. Our birthing songs are a compass, a spiritual, sacred compass. And I ask you, how do we return to the soil, the moon, and the wind to the birth room? How do we return these to the birth room? And some of you may say, we can't return them in a hospital. How we going to bring the moon and soil and wind to the birth room? It goes back to what I said at the beginning of the oral archive. That's my medicine. That may not be yours. But that I am no longer doing my work through the system to invoke change. I am bringing the moon and the soil and the wind with me, because I am forevermore supporting women and birthing with the earth as their co-midwife. Okay? And then we talk about how do we bottle up the elements within us if we ever need a hospital, because they're there when we need them, not when we don't need them. So, also, stemming from the sacred 20-page offering on the importance of midwives and a calm nervous system. How might our nervous systems be better midwives if we remembered the trees, the soil, and the stars that they are watching too? How might our nervous systems support us in being powerful midwives? Or if you're not a midwife, thinking about your midwife having a calm, nourished, trusting, confident nervous system embedded in spiritual reliance and anchoring. If your midwife remembered the medicine of the trees and the soil and the stars, and that they're watching and supporting her, how could a nervous system connected to all of those elements make this person a better midwife? So these are all questions that I'm not going to answer for you, but that they are there for your inquisitiveness. Now, I'm going to leave you with a few brief stories about ancient Africa and midwives, our pre-colonial ancestral stories. Just a few things, okay? Now, our ancient African ancestors then, and even now many, believe that the prenatal period is essential and sensitive, and that this is a time when a pregnant woman should receive all the love and care. It should be all love and care. And thinking about in ancient Africa, women were taught to participate in the measurement of her gestational age and how to monitor the growth of the pregnancy. So today, a lot of women don't know, like they're using an app or they're waiting for the doctor to tell them how far along they are and if they're growing or not. So back in ancient pre-colonial times, women were taught in pregnancy to mark the tree at the rise of each new moon, and at the 9th marking, they needed to prepare themselves for delivery. So typically, pregnancy will last 10 moons, right? And they typically birth would happen around the 10th full moon, but they knew around that 9th new moon marking, they needed to start to prepare themselves for delivery. Now, in addition, the birth attendants, the midwives, the people who supported the midwives, they calculated the pregnancy with the moon. And it is expected that after the 9th moon, which is the 9th calendar month, that the pregnant woman is expected to deliver within the next 4 weeks. So again, that 10 moon mark. Now, this information comes from Larson, Masani, and Monkey, Monkhe, from an article in 1983 about indigenous birth. Now, in pre-colonial ancient times, the midwives also monitored the fetal heartbeat either by putting their ear to the belly if the woman was far enough along. The room would be quiet and still. There was patience. There wasn't a rushing to hurry up and get a heartbeat and say, okay, got it, bye. There was a quietness where the midwife would rest her ear to the belly to not just hear the heartbeat, but to hear the sound of the water of the womb rushing up against the belly and against her face, to feel the kicking and the energy of the baby, to feel the vibrations of the body. If you know about Reiki or laying on of hands or energy healing, you know how important that is. We can't do that by just doing a fetal palpitation just to measure. Fetal palpitations is to measure and feel if something is wrong and if there's growth. The Doppler is just to hear. There currently in midwifery, you're not trained to understand the energetic balancing of the fetus, the baby, the uterus, the water. Everything is about diagnostic check. So these spiritual midwives, by bringing the mom is laying on the earth, maybe on a grass woven mat, if that, but most of the times under a tree. There's quietness, there's stillness, the ear is to the belly, the hands are around the belly, the bodies are close together, there's a trusting and a breathing. And if it was too early on and the midwife needed to hear the baby's heart tone, they would use a horn of an animal that resembled the modern fetoscope, which is how it was developed by a white male. If you understand, like the Pennard horn that's named after a white male, but our ancestral midwives were already using horns. Another way that in ancient pre-colonial times that mothers measured themselves among the Vasonga people, Vatsonga, the woman was given a grass known as Ritlangi, Ritlangi, by the traditional midwives, and she would tie that grass around her waist. Now, as baby would grow bigger in the womb, the grass was expected to become tighter around the waist of the pregnant woman. Now, this practice allowed for the pregnant woman and the midwife will allow for the pregnant woman to feel how her body was growing and to be conscious of herself and how her body was growing and expanding, that she could better understand if her baby was growing or not in the way that it needed to. So these were indigenous, traditional, pre-colonial practices. And another thing is that these indigenous practices helped to impact the decisions and the activities of everyday living. It wasn't just about when the woman would go and see her midwife, because the midwife lived in the community, only provided care in the community. They were eating food grown in the community. Everybody in the community knew each other. It was a way for the midwife to make sure that the mother was aware of taboos with foods she should not eat. And we'll talk about foods next oral archive. But taboos and movements and overexertion. So it was a daily living technique. So indigenous practices are really expressed in the daily movements, and I don't want to use the word attitude and behavior because that's so scientific, but the daily motions and movements of the community. So with that, I leave you with a couple of things. We want to understand that in many of the indigenous practices in pre-colonial Africa, and still some today, they're linked to cultural and religious beliefs and values. And cultural beliefs really shape the way people think, their views, and consequently their practices. So the colonialism that I talk about a lot, the colonialization of Africa by the Western world and white patriarchy and even white feminism, this really led to the forceful dismissal and erasure of the culture, and it led to being seen as irrelevant and non-important. And this colonialism changed the primary beliefs of African people, and it moved it to this secondary belief, and it promoted Western practices as primary and better. I'm so used to saying primordial. So you have now people who will say, oh, I don't want that. I don't want that witch medicine. I don't want that hoodoo this. I don't want that. That's evil. That's bad. That's devilish. I'm going to go to the doctor. I'm going to go and do this and that. And now we have high levels of every negative outcome you can consider, because we have abandoned our ways, because we allow white colonialists to come into our villages, communities, countries, and homes and look us in our face and to convince us that everything that we have had since the beginning of time was bad and that we should take what they were giving us. And it's time for us. We all know it was wrong. But what's wrong is if we stay under the spell and under the guise and under the programming of white patriarchy and white colonialist and capitalist practices that only wants to benefit monetarily from our pain, from our dismissal, and from our death and our harm. And we cannot allow that. So that brings me back to how I started. This is the reason why I will not any longer sacrifice my body or mind and spirit to work in the system to bring people out of it. Because if I do that, and I know that we have hundreds and thousands of midwives, tons of people who want to do right, but I'm one of the very few people who are interested in bringing full pre-colonial ancestral systems, not retreats, not practices, not workshops. No, full village cultural life systems, not embedded in pre-colonial capitalist structures and patriarchal structures. It's very few of me, right? That have lived on both sides, that is committed to this. Why would I sacrifice myself knowing that if I'm going, all the work and the hard work can go with me? And then some communities will have to start over. We are still reeling from the loss of grand pioneers that we've had that can never be replaced. And all we have are their words and their books and their stories and hope. So in order for me to get us as far as we can, I need to get out of this system and do this work from the earth with the earth. Thank you so much for being here today. Now, as we close the oral archive, our key take-homes are this. This pink full moon is showing you the beauty and the bounty that's blossoming in you from the seeds that you trusted to plant. Let them blossom. Move out of the way. Welcome them in. Don't make one of the planetary energies force you to do what you already want to do. Right? Call it in. Call in the seeds that you planted to walk into this next stage of where you should go. Call in the birth songs from your bones, from your ancestral lineage. Make sure you are feeding and taking care of your ancestors and the spirits that work with you, not just so when you need them that they're there, but so that they can continue to guide you on your path, especially if you're a midwife. Okay? And then those 4 questions that I brought to you about what should you do or how should you think about these different parts of being with the earth and welcoming the earth and welcoming different parts of the earth back into being with your nervous system. Think about those questions and sit with those. Remember, there is no rush. Don't rush to, even though these are all wonderful, beautiful things to restore, don't rush to just do it to say, ooh, look, I'm doing this. I'm posting this to social media. What good does that do if you haven't mastered it? What good does it do for you to just put something there to say you're doing something ancestrally? Sit with it. Move whatever it is that you have. The patriarchal variation of that needs to move fully out of your body and mind. And then allow that to anchor in you. Practice it, sit with it, master it before you begin to offer it to someone else. We have enough people out here picking up things one day and teaching them the next, not knowing what they're doing. And that's something that I refuse to do, and why I've taken my time as a midwife. I've taken my time as a priestess, and I've taken my time as a spiritual and light worker to master all the things that I do, from being an oracle, from divination, to being a birth worker, a writer, a teacher. I've mastered everything that I'm giving you and everyone else that I share with. So I invite you to imagine what it means to give birth with the earth as your co-midwife, whether it's a physical baby or the birth of your dreams. I thank you. This is Midwife and Priestess Okunshola. I will see you in 2 weeks on the next new moon in April. I give thanks. Take care.